Hello and welcome to Climactic. This week we have an interview with Councillor Tim Baxter of Port Phillip Council, which was recorded with Mark Spencer at St Kilda Town Hall on Friday the 27th of April.
And we're putting this episode up less than a week after we recorded it, because what we talked about with Tim was actually very timely. Tim and the other councillors of Port Phillip City Council have been hard at work on their sustainability plans and their budget, and now they've actually got it out for community consultation and they're waiting to hear back.
And isn't it great to see a local council getting on the right track after years of saying the right things on climate change, but really not doing enough? And it's our goal to increase community participation and engagement on climate change.
Agreed. So I promised Tim, Councillor Baxter, we'd get this up as soon as possible and encourage our Victorian listeners, and yes, we know you guys are listening in Victoria, to check out the draft plan, and it's right there in the show notes. They really want feedback and they need it by May 18th, so feel free to jump on, let them know what you're happy with and what you're not happy with. We'll have this interview, one more next week, and then our big waste special on May 17th as well to remind you to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, Mark, what can listeners expect from this episode?
Well, we got into it pretty quick, to be honest. The story of Tim's path to City Council we covered over right at the start, where he got his passion for the environment and where that comes from. Then we move into some more of the moving parts of local government, which I think is really vital for everyone to know who wants to affect change. Basically, I think it's fair to say we were a couple of geeky democracy, technology, and environmental nerds about the whole thing, and we just had a really fun chat. So we hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I did being there on the day.
Yeah, and I learned a lot too, Mark. Okay, that's great. All right then, here we go with our interview of Councillor Tim Baxter.
Cool. Well, Tim Baxter, thank you so much for sitting down with me in beautiful... Is it Port Phillip Town Hall or St Kilda Town Hall?
This is St Kilda Town Hall.
Yep.
Port Phillip has 3 town halls.
Excellent, but this is the functional town hall?
Yeah,
because
this is where the admin is.
South Melbourne is now a performing arts studio space, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful old building.
That's gorgeous.
But we're here in the old wing of the building, right? So
The heritage
Yes.
wing of the building, they call it. Yeah.
as I walked into the room, it was a dark room. There was no smoke, but it was a dark room. But then you turn on the lights. Now we're sitting under the light, and it's lovely. So, Tim, you came up to me when I was at a Friends of the Earth event on Earth Day, and you introduced yourself as a councillor and said you want to be on the show and you want to actually talk about what you're doing with council work. And I was so encouraged and heartened by that. I was really floored, actually, because we were talking for a couple minutes before you said you were a councillor. So it was really nice actually coming into this knowing, Tim, that's the guy I met, not this is Timothy Baxter, the city councilman.
Decision maker.
That's right. That's right. So I've come in, I think, with a lot better sort of mindset for a chat than sort of normal person off the street walking over the microphone to speak to a city councilman. Before we sort of get into what you're doing with the work, I'm sort of interested about your path to be here, what your background was, and how you got thinking about the sustainability and environmental side. So your background's in business law, finance?
Well, banking and finance is my background, but I didn't study it at uni.
So what did you study at uni?
I studied a Bachelor of Arts, which is what you study when you don't know what to study. Mm-hmm. And I majored in history and philosophy and minored in politics. I picked up the minor in the last year when I started to get interested in politics. And I have yet to really put that degree to use as a piece of paper, but I do have to say that the skills and knowledge that I picked up have helped my brain quite a lot.
Definitely.
It's just very hard to quantify exactly what subject did what, but it's...
I would flip that around and say that should be the prerequisite study for anybody going into city council.
That's what I think, yeah.
Bring in some context, some ability to think, some ability to realize the way in which you're thinking and try to change it. That's powerful.
Perhaps the military history helps when you're trying to...
wage a campaign.
Yeah, trying to run a campaign or get the numbers for a particular council vote. So
that's right. Fantastic.
I have a weird background. I've worked in a number of different sectors. I used to run nightclubs. I ran my own mobile bar business for a little while. And then I ended up working in banking and finance, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, how did that jump happen? Man of the people to man of the boardroom.
I was just sort of the financial crisis sort of hit, and a lot of nightclubs and venues were sort of tightening up and perhaps even going under. So I needed to go and work in something safe. I wanted to get married and start a family and stuff.
Yes.
So banking is about as safe as it can be, although with the Royal Commission at the moment, there's
some heads on blocks.
Absolutely. So and so I got out of banking roughly around the time that I was elected to council, and look, the path to that was not a professional path at all. That was mostly based on always being interested in social justice and sustainability, and then deciding that politics was a good outlet for that, getting involved a little bit in the Labor Party, getting very disillusioned there and moving to the Greens, and then running for council there. And I think one of the things that that makes you get really interested in local issues is that the moment you have kids in an area, because all of a sudden you're joining parents groups.
Yeah, you're exposed to a lot more of that community.
Exactly.
There's so many aspects of the neighborhood you're even living there you're unaware of.
Exactly. Yeah. We didn't know most of this stuff, and then once you start to put down roots, though, then all of a sudden you start to get really interested in the minutes of the last council meeting.
That's right.
And
that's kind of a precursor to getting into local politics, isn't it? If you find you're reading the minutes, that's a warning sign.
That's a sad warning sign. But, yeah.
No, it's really great. So as a rough sort of timeline, so you were in sort of the nightclub operation, hospitality space until about 2008 in the financial crisis.
It was about 2006 or 7 or so.
Earlier, yeah.
But you're right. It was probably around 2008. Yeah.
Okay, very good. And then in business and banking. And then when did you run for council?
The first time I ran for council was in 2012 in the city of Port Phillip here, and I was unsuccessful. It was very close, and I think that all that did was make me more fired up to run again.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing. When you come close, that's almost worse than getting destroyed.
Yeah, because it makes you come back. If you'd been just devastated, you'd been like, well, okay, I've tried, that's it, door shut.
Exactly, but I just got angry. So I came back, and there were a number of different changes in between. There were electoral changes in the way that voting happened for council that were actually quite beneficial. So this time I came back, and yes, I got a better vote than last time, but it almost didn't matter. Even if I'd gotten the same vote as last time, I would have gotten in. So it just meant that there's now more voices. You don't need as much of the vote to get elected, and I think it's a better council now.
That's good. Did they do that by expanding the number of seats?
They did a little bit. So they went from 7 councillors to 9 councillors, but instead of having 7 single-member wards where each, in order to get on council, you had to get more than 50% of the vote in whatever ward you were running in. Instead, they've now got 3 multi-member wards, whereby people who get a significant vote, but perhaps not 50%, they might get 25 or 20% or something, still have quite a good chance of getting elected.
Oh, that's really cool.
Which I think that broadens it out to people that don't just have the most money or the biggest profile.
Very good. Well, I'm very interested in the politics side. I'm weaning myself off American political news at the moment.
Now's a good time to do that.
Oh, it is. I'm going from 8 or 9 podcasts a day about American politics down to 1 a week.
Okay.
But I could get it. Like, it's really interesting how it was, sort of first past the post system in the single party wards. Now it's kind of like a preferential system with the multi-member districts and stuff. But that's all talk for another day. And I don't know if any of my listeners are interested in politics. So
we could do a whole new podcast on that. Just
local politics, how it works. I'm signing up.
Sophology,
I'm going to be doing podcasts left and right soon.
Good. Hopefully just left.
Yes. Left and middle. There we go. Good. That's a really good idea of sort of where you're coming from. You were this kind of man of the people. You knew how to run a business out in real life and interact with real people, and even people kind of when they're out on the town at night, kind of at their worst, and dealing with the realities. It's not all just that stratified atmosphere of the boardroom with banking and kind of...
Absolutely.
That's great. So you're used to sort of dealing with a diversity of people. So when you got into council, did you have in mind who you were coming in to represent?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, like I said, I obviously ran as a Green, not because I'm there to represent the Greens, but so that my community knows what I stand for. A lot of people, they look down the list of their local council. They don't know who these people are, who these candidates are for local council. They come from anywhere. But at least you can say, well, that guy's the Green, so I've got a good idea about what he's about. Yep. He's going to be about sustainability. He's going to be about social justice, those sorts of things. So I did that to basically put a big flag on myself. These are the things I believe in. But in terms of, representing a particular constituency, Look, some people come in because they've got a very narrow focus. I'm here to represent, business, for example, and that's all I care about. And if something comes up on council that's not about business, I'm not interested. That's not me. I try to be across everything. I'm really do my best to represent everyone, even people who are very not nice to me when they have contact with me. Yep. And I really do my best to respect them as my constituents, even if they're the most right-wing, so different from my values as you can possibly get. Yeah. It's my job to listen and to take their concerns on board. Yeah. If there's general constituencies that got me here, I would say that, obviously people who, the kind of people who go out and pick up rubbish on the beach or go and do community plantings and those sorts of things, that would be, I would say, a natural constituency.
Yeah, you feel quite aligned with them. You understand their interests and you do want the best for what they're wanting.
Yeah, absolutely. But I certainly don't sort of prioritise them above any other
Got a baseline respect for everyone who lives in your constituency.
But our values certainly align. And so there's definitely plenty of things on which I'm working hard and that community knows I'm working hard on. And they give me very good feedback. Often very frank feedback, but good feedback.
I'm glad to know you're getting that frank feedback. I found, it's a very pale imitation, but 2 weeks in of doing the show, you're doing great doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anything get better. You want to know how you're failing and what can be better. And the hard part, I assume, about council is that you're being told all the time that everything could be better. And it does become a question of prioritization and then juggling it with the other council members. And
absolutely.
We could probably talk about how the local governance dynamics works for hours, but that's probably a good segue into you came in to reflect everyone, and especially what the broader purpose of what a lot of your constituents want, which is social justice, climate justice, and a greater awareness. Whereas some people in local governments here or elsewhere come in because they're reflecting the interests of their business club or their chamber of commerce or something like that, which has got to be a lot easier because it's a very clear set of priorities for them. You can find your path there quite easily. But if we just quickly jump into the heavy stuff, those are all the softball questions, I guess. So climate change, it's there. It's a change of everything in our social dynamic. It's a changing of the very foundations of how we live, the climate we live in. How do you wake up in the morning and know what to do about that topic? How do you not get overwhelmed with stuff, especially when people like me come to you and say, the sky is falling, help me, oh my God, we're all going to die?
Look, it's a good question because everyone handles it in different ways. Some people become just unbelievably despondent. Other people are fired up with rage. I probably swing between the two. And I do spend some time trying not to think about the ramifications so much, but to focus purely on the small things I can do and what is in my control, because I can stress a lot about what's not in my control. And that's, again, that can be good to motivate yourself at times, but sometimes it can get a bit too much and you just go, okay, so what can we do? And I think that certainly on council, I'm going to be the first to acknowledge that, council's foremost duty is not to do the federal government's job on climate change. But we definitely have a duty to our community who are going to be affected by climate change. We're a seaside community, and we're heavily built up and we have areas of massive heat island effect and those sorts of things. We have a duty to our community to do our part to address climate change and also to shame some of the leaders, the federal leaders, to show by example that we're doing something where they will not. So
where they say it's not possible to or too costly or there's not enough benefit.
Exactly. So do I think that Port Phillip can solve the issue of climate change by itself? Of course not. That's absurd. But there's a lot of influential and powerful things we can do at a local level, and I focus very much on what are those things.
That's really good. That's a good sort of set of tactics you can use to wake up and do your job effectively every day, is not to go to every time there's a climate warrior, an Al Gore, next week a Bill McKibben in Melbourne, go to those events and get overwhelmed and despondent. And I know that's not what they're trying to do, but my personality sounds like maybe some days a bit of yours is to become overwhelmed, but to overcome that, you just focus down on what you do in local council, how you can do your job best today. And that's great. Is that sort of the advice you'd give to other council members, maybe people looking to run for local council? Just
absolutely. I know. So look, on on council, we're lucky we've got a few councillors who are very interested in taking action on climate change. There are other councillors who have been able to go further because they
further on that spectrum, further down that path.
Because they have either more resources or they're just more of their councillors are more serious about it. You've got to be able to do what you can do. I know councils where, I've got a mate who's the only person on the council who cares about climate change, but he's still able to change a couple of things, get something into the procurement plan that means that we're going to procure a few more of council products and services from companies that have a better, climate change policies and aren't as exposed to...
Try to spend the money a bit better.
Exactly, and all of these little things, some of them are quite big. These councils are huge.
They're organisations of serious clout,
Absolutely. So, the City of Port Phillip has an annual budget of about $220 million, and we oversee assets of a couple of bill, I think. And now that some of those include roads and things like that.
Yeah, certainly.
Exactly.
Yeah, no one's going to buy them yet.
But they're huge, and so when they make a small change, it can often have a really, really big impact.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I would say is that whatever you can do, if you're a decision maker and if you've got a position of influence, use it to get whatever you can.
Yes.
No matter how big or small.
That's right.
Big's good.
Yeah, big is good, but we do have to get there. I've got one good question maybe, but also just a quick. From on the ground, a thank you for how the money does get spent. I just got associated with a community garden at Foundry Park, just behind the South Melbourne Town Hall, and I went there for the first time yesterday. And we got some coffee grounds we picked up from a cafe, stopped and going to landfill, did a bit of mulching on a bed of broad beans, and I was able to pick enough veggies from the community garden to feed myself last night. And it was great, and that wouldn't have happened without council taking some proactive steps and giving a grant to put in 12 raised beds and a water tap on a bit of public land, and it's magic. And
absolutely. And
little things have tangible value
in terms of money. In terms of our budget, that's such a small thing, but it's so powerful. And what we really are able to leverage off there is people power. That's actually the community that made that happen. We just gave them a bit of money.
Yes.
There's no way that council could actually make a community garden happen. It's a community garden, not a council garden.
That's right.
So
you guys provide the garden, we bring the community.
Exactly. And so that's where the real power comes from. Is yes, I'm on council. Yes, I can make decisions, but the real powerful day-to-day change comes when people from the community get together, organise, and actually say, we want to do this. How can you facilitate that? And council goes, well, we'll do this, we'll do that. That is where really powerful things happen every single day in a local level, and I love it. Absolutely love it.
Well, City of Port Phillip needs its own podcast, I guess, talking about those big things that happen every single day, because it's really hard to keep up with what's going on at the moment, but I'm able to listen to shows produced in people's bedrooms from all over the world, so I don't know, I'll push that on the side. I'll push for more sort of outreach in that way. The thing you just said about, when council agree on something and there's a community need and those can meet in the middle, powerful things happen. What's the state of sort of consensus at the moment on the council? What's a safe topic to bring up in the realm of climate change, and what's still debated and will lead to an argument? So you get someone like me in the room who takes it as, gospel, as fact, and it's weird to bring in biblical allegory. I used to be a Christian as a kid. I'm not anymore. So maybe, I take it as fact that, climate change is, of course, happening. It is primarily man-made. We are going to see large sea level rise by the end of the century, even with large action against it because of locked-in effects. We are seeing, it's not a debatable thing. You can say the Arctic 2 months ago was warmer than Europe. And that's just a thermometer. You can't disagree with that. So how much of that, and then the flow-on consequences, like, hey, we should ban diesels. We should ban single-use plastic bags. These shouldn't be debated topics, but what's not debated on the council right now, and what still is?
Well, it's an interesting conversation because most people you talk to, whether they're in local government, state or federal government, will not dispute any of that. They'll say all of that, yep, climate change is totally happening.
But I want some money to buy this.
Well,
no.
They'll just say it's not our problem. And this happens on local government quite a lot. Even though the local government Act clearly says that it is our job as a council to take care of our community, protect their health and well-being, advocate for their priorities. And I would say that means we have to tackle climate change because it's going to negatively affect their health and because the majority of our community
potentially,
and the majority of our community want us to do something about it. So I would say that just ticks all of the boxes in terms of our legal obligations to our community. There will always be councillors who say, no, our job is to take care of the rubbish. Our job is to
take care of the streets,
is to maintain streets, and that is an unbelievably narrow interpretation, and of course those people will always be caught out by the fact that they'll then ask for funding for something that isn't roads, rates, and rubbish. And so it's clear they don't believe in this roads, rates and rubbish thing. They just don't want your climate change thing coming in and messing up the whole thing. So it's never so much debated as an issue. It's sidestepped and it's ignored, and that happens on, I would say, most councils. The one thing that was definitely debated here was when a large section of the community, they signed a petition from the Melbourne Port Stop Adani group against Adani. So then the organisers of that petition then sent a joint letter to council saying, can you divest from anything involved with Adani? I mean, it was more complicated than that, but that was
the
a
simple
gist.
message of we don't want anything that's happening in our council to support in this coal mine.
And they were backed up by that petition against Adani, which was signed by a couple of thousand people in our community. And so we received that joint letter, which is treated as a petition, joint letter petition, same thing. And our officers received that, and they basically said, look, in order to respond to this petition, because we're legally required to respond to every petition, even if it's just to say noted, but in order to respond to this petition effectively, we have to prepare a report on what our exposure to Adani-related companies are. So we need to do that work. And upon some questioning, they sort of said it probably wouldn't be too difficult to do because we're already reviewing our procurement process. We're already working on our sustainable environment strategy. So it kind of would dovetail in with that. Unfortunately, a majority of councillors decided not to request that report from the officers. The rationale given by some of those councillors was that the officers are too busy. They don't have the capacity to take time and resources out to prepare this report, despite the fact that the officers had said it's kind of runs parallel to some stuff we were doing anyway. We don't want them preparing this report. And so that actually got voted down at council. I personally was shocked. I thought we'll prepare the report and then we can argue about what's in the report later.
At least get on the same page about the findings of this report.
Exactly. And I thought preparing a report was just a no-brainer. And so I was actually quite shocked that the majority of councillors voted not even to ask for a report. And so I was quite upset about that. The Melbourne Port Stop Adani group did come back later with a modified ask, which was mostly just about us stating our opposition to Adani. And that got up, that passed. It didn't require much from us.
So the council's passed a proposition to say the council opposes Adani.
Yes. Yep.
But we won't prepare a report on what our involvement with Adani is.
Exactly. So, the less you know, the better, I suppose.
Yes.
And look, I understand why some people would be worried about that, because what's in that report? What if it turns out a major contract that we've got is tied up somehow with Adani, maybe even tangentially?
What do we do? You're receiving that company, the service they're giving them.
Exactly. What do we do? But I would say prepare the report and then talk about what you're going to do, because I might be able to compromise and say, okay, we'll stay with them, knowing that they're partially exposed, but because it'd be too much of a risk to council right now to do otherwise. But we'll review it as we go down
public
the track.
and say their contract's up in 2 years. We will review. All of that sort of stuff. So I thought that was a sensible way to go about it. But so that was one debate. That was one big climate change debate that has happened recently. But most of the debate
when we're going back and forth about how we structure, say, our sustainable environment strategy or our council plan, most of this stuff happens behind closed doors as we're just trying to work out where each other sits on things, right? So it's not exactly public debate. It's more, going line item by line item and going, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What are we going to put out to the community for consultation? And that's where a lot of that discussion happens. And I say there's no vicious debate there, but some people would simply rather not think about this or rather not talk about that.
So, any opposition to the recognition and action on climate change doesn't come out based on someone's. It doesn't come out until you're literally going line item by line item in the budget. There's not ever an ideological debate happening in council chambers because these two councillors are not from different parties, but associated with. I know that's how, as we talked about with councillors' work, you didn't run for the seat for the Greens party. The federal parties don't put up candidates for city council.
Sure, but I did. So the state Greens did endorse me.
Okay,
because I was the lead Green candidate, and that meant that no other
Green was getting that endorsement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so there was that, and that's unusual. But the Labor Party has just announced they're going to start doing that as well.
Okay, and that's quite a big change, isn't it? Because before that, Liberal and Labor didn't endorse.
Well, they used to a while ago.
Okay,
Labor used to back in the good old days, bad old days, whatever they were.
80s, 90s.
Yeah, and then they stopped doing it, but now they. But I think it's valuable because it's just fessing up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully, whatever inhibition is stopping that line item process, that just gets out in the public a bit more. So you actually know who you are voting for and what they're going to do, rather than just saying, "Oh, yes, we agree," but actually get people's priorities out front and center. So, if you say, "Yes, I'm not opposed to action on climate change, but it is my 20th lowest priority," that means that none of the stuff needs to happen on climate change is going to happen anytime soon. Yeah,
that's basically what it is. So there are some people who they may care about it, but it's not anywhere near their top priority.
That's right. You prepare that list of what do you care about, and it's
exactly
it's down the bottom.
And that's why for a long time Port Phillip Council really lagged in terms of sustainability because they always had councillors that sort of cared about it, but wasn't massively high on their priority list. It was always the first thing to get pushed aside. And so that I think has changed. I think we've now got a council that on the whole is very keen on this sort of stuff, and we're focusing very much on sustainability. But I think that what people in the community need to understand is that in order to sustain that momentum, that can't just come from councillors. When we're doing consultation on things, we need feedback from the community that say, I love that you're focusing on sustainability. This is really important. Or, I've noticed you've funded this for 2 years. I think it needs 5. You need to commit more, whatever. But if all we hear is a chorus of silence, it's simply going to reinforce this idea that some councillors have that, I'm the only one that cares about sustainability in this community. And we know that's not the case because this is Port Phillip. We know what this community is like.
That's right.
They are not climate change deniers.
Not at all. Well, Tim, that's why I was really impressed by you personally coming out to that Friends of the Earth event on Earth Day, taking your own personal time. When I was talking to you and you said at the end, well, I better go spend some time with my family now. I'm like, I knew that this is not on the clock activity for you. This was, you were getting out, going to your constituents, because you said it's tough when they don't come to you and tell you what they want. But here we were in the park right next to Luna Park trying to talk over the roller coaster. And the recording sounds pretty fun. And you came out to that. And do you know, did other councillors do that, to your knowledge?
So one other councillor did show up right at the end. I think she was coming straight from work, so I'm not trying to slag her off, but she did come late. So that was Louise Crawford. Did make it there, and I saw her briefly. That was just before we sort of did the photos in front of the Mr. Moon. yeah, she did come along. There are other councillors who are certainly interested in these sorts of things, but scheduling, sometimes you just can't make a thing. Councillor Catherine Copsey and Councillor Oggy Simic, for example, are very, very keen on sustainability and climate change. Definitely, but Councillor Simic has a new baby, and Councillor Copsey, I think, had something else on. So sometimes,
it was a Sunday.
and that's the thing. It was a Sunday, and so sometimes we do get a bit of judgment from the community when we're not at an event because they think we don't care. But we're human beings. We might have another thing on.
Absolutely,
that just happens. So, but it is important that we get out to as much as possible to just see, to just show the community that your local representatives care. Obviously, there was a state representative there as well, in Martin Foley. These things are not, they might seem tokenistic, but it's a great reassurance to activists in the community that someone up there, an actual decision maker, is noticing and caring.
That's right. You're not just yelling at the sky. And it's good you address that it can seem tokenistic, and definitely if you're not there yourself and you just hear that one of the local MPs showed up to an event, so those people think that he's on their side, so they'll vote. But then if you have the chance to actually listen to these people, and I think people listening to this will hear that you are indeed a person and not a council robot. I think actually hearing what people have to say is a great tool for empathy. And I was very heartened, hearing Martin get up and speaking to you, of course. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to some of the other council members. So the reason you kind of had me in today was quite timely because you're doing this draft that was just released of the
Sustainable Environment Strategy, which
I'm glad that's not an acronym.
Which is the SES, which we've called a sustainable future. And this is basically, it came out of, so when a new council gets elected, they're required to develop a council plan, which is a strategic plan for that 4-year term.
Yes.
And it can go longer. So we did a 10-year plan, and obviously the next council that gets elected can do whatever they want with it. They can modify it, scrap it, change it, whatever. But we just feel that 10-year planning actually makes more sense, particularly when you're providing certainty to the community, but also to the organisation that's got to go and do all this work that we're setting up for them. So we put together a council plan, and the council plan had some pretty ambitious stuff in terms of sustainability. As I said, previous councils have not done so well on that, so there was actually quite a lot to come back to pull back from where they were. So we put that out there, and essentially what that meant is you can't just write some pretty words in a council plan document. You have to actually flesh that out, and that's why we then started developing strategies that underpin this document. So there'll be a waste strategy coming out in the next couple of months. There'll be a transport strategy in the next couple of months. There's an art strategy, and this one is the sustainability strategy. Excellent. So it's a draft strategy that we've put together that fleshes out and says more about how we're going to achieve what we want to achieve. It starts setting some actual targets on things, which is really important, more than just words. And it's in draft form, so it's actually gone out for consultation. It's 3 weeks of consultation. We want to know what the community thinks. So before I go into talking about anything that's in the draft, I would just urge people to go to the City of Port Phillip Have Your Say section and find the council plan and budget review page, and in there it's got the strategies that underpin how we're reviewing the council plan and budget. So sustainable future is under there. And I think that like I said, we really need people from the community to actually look at these measures, look at these things that we're saying that we want to do. And if you don't have any context for those, have a look at what other councils like the City of Darebin, City of Moreland, even the Byron Shire in New South Wales, what they're doing on sustainability. And feel free to compare us to them, because they're the real deal. They want to do stuff, and I feel like this is a good strategy and this is what we're doing, but it may not be perfect, and I'm happy to get feedback. So Excellent. I really want people to put that in. So essentially the big difference that we're going with from previous councils is that previous councils had talked about a number of different ways in which we were going to live more sustainably. That included emissions reduction, potable water usage, getting the potable water usage down, measuring the amount of pollutants and contaminants pulled out of waterways and other travelling water in the municipality, soil contamination, all of these sorts of things had been measured in our previous Towards Zero plan. The problem was that we set targets, kind of half measured them, put the document on a shelf and forgot about it.
Yep.
And then we came back and looked at, when I got on the council, we came back and looked at it and realised we weren't going to meet any of these measures.
Yes.
And it required a significant investment for us to even get to like 60% of meeting those measures.
Yes.
So
I'm sure those measures in the first place were not very ambitious to start with. They could have been.
No, I think they were quite ambitious, but there's no point being ambitious if you're not going to back it up with proper funding and proper measurements.
Yep.
So I think that was silly. So instead we're trying to do something that's not, I wouldn't say it's less ambitious. It may in fact be more ambitious, but it's smarter in terms of the way that we're actually doing it. So we're talking about obviously reducing our emissions, and it's very, very easy for any council to say we want to reduce council's net emissions to zero, because that's just council buildings and the council fleet. That's like 0.4% of the total emissions from the city of Port Phillip in totals. So yeah, we can say that, and we will do that. We've recently signed up to the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, which means that all of our power will come from a wind farm out in Crowlands. So tick, net zero emissions from the city of Port Phillip buildings. But we have to go deeper than that.
Definitely, but that would have been the crowning achievement for other councils. They would have been crowing about for years. Like, we're a net zero council, but you've addressed it, said, yeah, we're doing it, here's how we're doing it, and that's done. That was in 30 seconds. Yeah. That's the scale you guys are at, your point of seriousness, and that's brilliant.
Absolutely, because that I think is a relatively minor achievement, right up there with any large scale business going net zero. We have a huge amount of emissions coming from outside of council, meaning the community and business in the city of Port Phillip. And so we need to actually get serious about reducing those emissions. And there's a number of ways that we can do that are set out in this document, and also its companion document, which is the Sustainable Cities Community Action Plan, which is basically how we're going to go out to the community and take action on some of these measures.
Excellent.
And that will involve things like working with some of the really big tower apartment blocks on energy efficiency. So not even putting any generation on, no solar panels or anything, but tweaking your air conditioning to be within a certain range could save one of those big blocks $40,000 a year in terms of money. So there's a money incentive, and it would obviously reduce emissions. So there are things that you can do. You can change lights, you can retrofit buildings, all of these sorts of things that we want to work with. Some of I would say the lowest hanging fruit in these really big apartment blocks. But that would leave out people like me who live in a block of 6 apartments, very small, about what we can do. And that's why we're also going to have programs how we can help people in smaller blocks to do that as well. There's also the business side of things, and we want to work with some of the biggest businesses and industries in the city of Port Phillip to also reduce their carbon footprint. So these are the sorts of things that I think that a lot of people would say is not council's responsibility, but I would say it absolutely is our responsibility, because our contribution to the sea level rise that's going to affect our own beaches.
Yes.
It has
to be self-interested about this.
Exactly. It is definitely acting within the best interests of our community.
Definitely.
And that's just emissions. There's a lot more in this plan, certainly around water. As climate change worsens, water is going to become such a precious resource, potable water that is, in that it'll rain and pour at some times and it'll be bone dry at other times. Water will always, and more as climate change goes on, it'll always be where you don't want it.
Yes.
Flooding someone's kitchen.
Yep.
And it won't be where you do want it. And so we need to have mechanisms in place that can properly capture, treat and clean water and use it as much as possible, because it's going to be liquid gold as we go forward, and it's going to be an increasingly scarce resource, and we need to treat it like the valuable commodity it will end up being. There's also obviously stuff in there about the heat island effect that most inner city municipalities that are highly densified will have. We want to increase canopy cover. We want to increase vegetation. This is the only serious way to combat that sort of heat. And so we've got targets in there about how we're going to do that. So
excellent.
These are some of the things, without going into too much detail, I probably already have. These are some of the things that we've got in there that a lot of councils would say are honestly too hard to do, but we're planning ahead, and we know that this is actually not only going to make our job easier in the future if we plan now, but it is going to deeply affect those members of our community that are most at risk of climate change, particularly people of low income, people who are elderly, anyone who's susceptible to heat waves or sea level rise.
Yep.
That's the worry.
Even just myself who doesn't like the heat, I think. I agree with you 100% about water is going to become a scarce resource. I'm just really amazed to be able to 100% agree with a member of City Council on that. That's more forward-looking, and tell some people about my concerns, and you're like, well, that's a little apocalyptic-y, and, I'm like, no, well, that's just, you look at the trends, and you look at our rate of current consumption, factor in population growth, and then, given the fact that we are seeing weather patterns changing, and deluges and drought. That's the pattern. So I'm so encouraged to hear this part of the plan. To all the listeners, the plan link, actually, from where you're listening to it right now, just scroll down. You can hit the link straight away there, whether on your podcatcher or on the website. Tim, thank you for going into that amount of detail on the plan. Once again, to the listeners, anyone who does live in other councils, if you want to help me measure that against what your council is doing, I would love your help in that. Anyone with any expertise on sort of legislation or plan analysis, please feel free to get in contact with me. Tim, I've got maybe just a couple of quick questions for you, maybe wrap it up, because you've been so generous with your time, and I don't want you to have a hoarse throat for the rest of your day talking to me about this.
Sure.
A politician must love, I'm not sure if you call yourself a politician, it's kind of like a slur these days.
It is these days.
A representative like yourself must kind of love having an audience of a recorder, because they're very attentive.
Yes, absolutely.
It's little red eyes always looking at you.
Exactly.
Here's a weird hypothetical for you. If climate change had been addressed and solved when we first learned about it through the scientific community in the 60s, 70s, and around 90s, any of these previous decades where we've already known what's happening and just let it continue to get worse. If it was a fixed issue now, and you look out the window, everything was the same, but for whatever reason we weren't emitting as much greenhouse gases as we are, what would you be doing with your life? How would it be different if you didn't have to worry about this?
Well, I mean, certainly life on council would be a lot easier without having to work out very complicated asset management plans about how our
roads,
buildings...
rates, and rubbish, and you'd love it.
Well, we wouldn't have to worry about which of our buildings is going to fall into the sea. But certainly social justice is a big thing for me. So I'd really be working... I think I might still be trying to help people get solar panels on their roofs just to save on their bills.
Yeah.
Just to help people who, low-income people or people who are at risk in this community, to help them in every way possible. I think I'd probably still be doing a bit of the same stuff that I'm doing. But I think also I certainly have lots of other interests in terms of this community, and the social justice angle. Housing and homelessness is a huge issue in the city of Port Phillip. We have a very large homeless population and a lot of people who are at risk. We have a very strange dichotomy of very, very wealthy suburbs and very, very disadvantaged pockets of massive disadvantage. And so that's something that I think I'd probably be concentrating on entirely if I didn't have to worry about this whole planet-killing nonsense that we have to deal with.
With our current reality, it's very poignant. So at the moment, because that is very important to you, you are having to kind of juggle those two. Do I care about the people who are suffering now and are disadvantaged right now? But then you said as well, like once you had kids, your perspective kind of broadened and the horizon got a little further out for you, and you can do you kind of have to, do you let yourself feel a little guilty sometimes when you're working on current problems and you're like, oh, that was some attention, some of my time that wasn't spent on the problems my kids are going to face? Yeah.
Look, sometimes I think it's good to be part of a team. I've got two other Greens on council with me. We're
going to get you 4 more.
Yeah,
6 more.
And but there are other councillors who aren't Greens who are still interested in climate change.
Good. They can
action in climate change. So so when I say a team, it's broader than just Greens. So, but I think it's you delegate. You can't do everything, and so that's why we've sort of unofficially, a few of us on council have taken different areas of focus. And I think that happens on every council, but I'm Mr. Sustainability guy, I'm Mr. Emissions and energy and all of that sort of thing. I'm the guy that's always going to be as informed as I can be and always have an opinion on these things. And we've got, Kat Copsey, who's very much a waste sort of person, along with Councillor Dick Ross as well, actually, who's the Deputy Mayor. He's also, he describes himself as a waste tragic, so they've got their focus. You've got Councillor Oggy Simic, who's housing. The guy knows his stuff. He's brilliant at that sort of stuff. So if we're able to sort of split up all of the problems of the world between us, we can. Then I can actually feel not too bad because I know Kat's taking care of that, or Oggie's taking care of that, or Dick's taking care of that. That we're giving, someone's giving it the focus it needs. Yes, I think, and that helps me feel a little bit better.
That's really good. Another just quick question for you, with talking about how local government works, how it's kind of easy. How the door is open for some people to hide behind, well, that's not our problem. That's at the state government or federal level. Our job as local council is rates, roads, and rubbish. If there's like a spectrum of local council is only like utilities, rates, roads, and rubbish, I'm going to keep saying it. It's very fun to say. Sure. And like complete devolvement, like local government is government and the federal government does defense. And that's about it. Sort of like the sort of libertarian sort of dream, but without the local government in there at all. Where do you kind of see yourself sitting on the spectrum now on what's better? Or maybe it's like sort of three questions in one. Sort of how is it split now? How do you want it split? But how should it be split best to combat climate change? Where do you think power is best situated for this situation?
It's a difficult question because we in the climate movement have supported different things at different times. When we've had a federal government that really wanted to take some kind of good action on the environment,
great, you get some efficiencies at that scale. You've got the big mandate, the big stick. Go for it.
Exactly. And so when we've had that, and we've had state governments that are trying to hold out, we'd be like, well, bugger the state government.
Yes, that's right. What do you guys even do?
But when it's been the other way around, when we've got state governments who want to take action, but a federal government who doesn't really, then obviously
the American paradigm currently.
Yeah. So I actually think the structure doesn't really matter. You actually have to get the right people in power at every single level. Personally, I think that local government in Victoria, local government is very, very weak, and it's been structured that way. We do not have the power over our municipality that the city of New York has over its. Or that other cities around the world, sometimes with bigger populations, sometimes with smaller populations. We can't even design our own planning system in the city of Port Phillip. Our job is only to make the decision on behalf of the minister, the planning minister. So, for example, someone wants to build a block of apartments and they want some exemptions in whatever, and so it comes to us and we have to make a ruling about how well that fits in with the whole planning scheme, which is a whole multi-layered scheme of different laws and regulations. We can make a judgment, but we're making a judgment based on this scheme, which is the minister's scheme. If we wanted to change those rules, we would have to apply to the minister to do a planning scheme amendment and say, we would like to change it in this way. And he could say no. So we're not really in control of planning in our municipality. We're not in control of how we do our rates. There's a statewide rates capping scheme instituted by the state government. So we actually, as a local government, do not have as much power to sort of control our destiny as I would say a lot of local governments across the world have. And so sometimes you get jealous because you look at, okay, well, the city of Hamburg in Germany or whatever is able to do this, and this, and they can attack climate change in this way. Yep. And I sort of look at that and say, well, we couldn't possibly do that because we just don't have these powers or those powers. Yeah. So it's tricky. And so if I was going to make any change to that structure in the system, I would say that I would embrace municipalities having more power, but they also need to be more open and transparent with their communities because there's a lot of councils out there that operate in a vacuum, essentially. And so it needs to be a true representative of its community in order to have that power. I think we do it quite well. We could probably do better, I'm sure, but there are other councils that don't do well.
Yes. Very good answer. It was a very, very big question and kind of confusing one. Phil, thank you so much for your time, Tim. Do you have any other sort of thoughts? So this show is going out currently. There's about 100 listeners in Victoria, which is I'm pretty happy with, from launching on Monday. Thank you to everyone who's listening.
I'll give you a bump. I'll see if I can double that.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I've got some amazing guests actually scheduled. There's a couple people coming over from the States that
Fantastic.
I'm going to have on, and I'll be on their shows. Very much. I was like, hey, want to help out a new guy to the scene? They're like, yeah, sure. You remember where that we were a year ago when we started? So what would make your job easier as a councillor to do the things that we all want to get done? Like, what can the public do? What can someone like me do?
Open support. So when we do these consultations, make a submission. If you look at something and you're happy with it, tell us you're happy with it. Yeah. Don't just be silent, And if you're unhappy with it and you think we can do more or less or, whatever, absolutely let us know. The amount of feedback that we get during these is a very small proportion of the community. And so the bigger that voice is, the more powerful it is. If you're one of, only 200 responders, that makes your submission really powerful. So I would say absolutely get involved in the consultation, not just on the sustainable environment strategy, but also the budget. Because we can talk about everything we want to do in a strategy, but if it's not funded, it's not happening. So you need to make sure that in the budget we've put enough money there. Do you think we've put enough money? Let us know.
Yeah.
This is what we need. So sometimes I feel like a little bit cut off from the community, that there's this silent majority out there that really wants us to do stuff on climate change. And they obviously do, because in my ward, in Canal Ward, the 3 people that were elected were a Green, a climate change lecturer at Melbourne Uni, and someone who self-described online as a climate activist. Clear that people in my ward wanted to send people to council to take action on that, but sometimes we just don't hear from the community for a little while, and
they send you off, and then
look, people get busy. Like, I understand that. Like, I'm not berating anyone for not getting in touch, but just
what would help.
Please remember how powerful it is when you do get in touch, that it can make a huge difference.
That's right. I've got maybe like a counterpoint about that, and about how I can hear what you need, but here's how it's kind of difficult for, say, me, and I'm new to Melbourne. There's a lot better informed and more engaged members of the electorate than me. Maybe playing dumb with the audience, everyone can feel good about how they're doing. And I live in the city of Melbourne, just across the street from the constituency, so I can see what you guys are doing, but not take part so much. When it comes to the submissions, I can say, well, here's what would make it 100% good for me, and I will submit that. But then I know that, I'm only going to get, if I'm lucky, 60% of what's good for me, because your job is to weigh up all these pros and cons, and you're getting what's 100% best from everyone, these 7 different parties, 8 distinct groups, however many there are, and you're trying to find where the middle ground is. What I would really respond to well is a kind of panel. So if we do have the ability to get the residents and the commercial sector and this industry and that industry into a room and be like, well, here's the proposal. How is it for you? And they're like, well, we're okay with this, but this would really hurt us here. And I until I worked in an industry for a while, I don't understand how it works until I've gone and done it, kind of thing. And same with the budget.
I think what you're talking about is deliberative democracy, which is a really, really exciting concept that's used in different ways in different places. First off, I'll address one of your first points. Don't stress about not being as informed of other members of your community. We hear some of the loudest voices in the community are the least informed.
Yes. Good.
Don't stress about that. Yep. Just let us know what you think. But certainly, I want to see, I'll probably admit I haven't been pushing as much of this lately as I should have been. There's been other priorities, but
I take it back. I called you a politician. A politician would never say that. That was so refreshing.
Well, nice. But it's deliberative democracy is actually a really interesting concept to use. You can't use it for everything, but essentially what it is you pull together it's like a citizens jury. So you pull together a bunch of different people. You make sure they come from a diverse background. They're not completely self-selected. You have criteria to select them, and you put them together, and you pump them full of information. You give them lots and lots of information about how they're going to look at a particular issue. Let's say it's Well, I'll use an example. There was one about Elstonwick Park North, where it was the council wanted to know what the future of this golf course was going to be. There were a couple of options that were looked at between, sort of wetlands and open space, more sporting grounds, all of these sorts of different things. And they put together a deliberative panel. They gave them all the information. They worked through it as a process of a couple of months. And then the deliberative panel came back and said, we want to go with such and such, right? So in that case, they wanted to go with an expanded wetlands and open space. The council then actually didn't go for that, so they actually didn't take that recommendation and went for something else, which I think is a bad application of deliberative democracy. It was really good up until that, but essentially what it is council is taking on a bit of risk and putting that decision in the hands of these people and getting them to make the decision. Well, council has to make the decision, but sort of getting them to make the recommendation and come back. And what often happens is that it's actually a really good way to make uninformed people really informed, because then they'll then champion that thing. So there will be people who went into that deliberative process about Elstonwick Park North and they would have been completely against wetlands or whatever, but through having all of the information and through having that responsibility of having to act in the best interest of everyone, they ended up going with the wetlands proposal, and then they ended up championing it. And that's actually an incredibly powerful thing you can do for your community, is to actually empower them and turn them into champions for change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I definitely want to see these things. You can't use it for everything.
No.
It's not only does it cost too much money,
you have to make someone into an expert.
Exactly. But there are some things where you're just like, we want to hand this over to the community. And we haven't done that so much. We did a bit of that when we were developing our council plan. We did facilitated workshops. We did, pretty informed sort of meetings. It wasn't quite at the full level of deliberative democracy, but it's definitely something that I want to do going forward to, I guess, watch this space.
Yes, I will. Very good. And I've got this vague impression in mind that, I'm just such a podcasting evangelist that if more of that process is distributed in this way, in this very sort of conversational way. So when that deliberative panel gets together and they have their conversations about it and they're advocating for what they believe in, now they've had the same information as everybody else, but they bring in their viewpoint from beforehand and their place in the community, that conversation would be, you'll just be able to see what resonates with you, and it's all got the correct information. They all have the same set of information. They're checking each other. You can't skew it and spin it in certain ways. Like that panel, and then the 8-part podcast series you can listen to over 2 weeks, and then the final vote. I don't know if anyone's doing that, but I think
it's a great way to engage with people. And part of being a councillor is hearing a whole bunch of people yell at you for all the decisions that you make, and you look at them and just say, I'd love to see what you would do if you were sitting in my chair having to make decisions. And Absolutely. That's a lot of what deliberative democracy does, is that it means that people can't just throw stones. No. They actually have to go in and make a responsible decision.
You have to think of the other side of the debate.
Absolutely. And so it, in effect, turns a bunch of people into the kind of people who could be on council.
Yes.
And that's probably the best thing about it, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's good. Whereas like town hall meetings, have you been involved with many of these sort of public town halls? It's going to be sort of part of the job.
Yeah.
Just due to the nature that they are this time, they're scheduled for now. It doesn't matter what else you're doing in your life. Maybe you're missing your kid's recital or something to be there. Like if you have an opinion about this, you want it to be as strong and persuasive as possible. You have one shot to do it. People are already petrified of public speaking. People come to town halls primed to be angry. Like
most of the time,
acting on that impulse. If we can kind of make that process asynchronous, it doesn't have to be in the same room at the same time. If you could record your position, your argument at any time it's right for you, send it to your council, they can listen to it any time it's right for them. Once we get a bit of maybe the technology in there to say that you can trust that when you send it, it'll be listened to. I think like we can sort of decentralize town halls a bit. I don't know. This is just an idea that's coming to me now, but we're spitballing, I guess, about better processes.
Well, and this would bring in a bunch of people who don't normally engage. So
that's right.
Obviously, we did have an not impromptu. It was planned, but on a particular issue, we had a public meeting, and the people that came to that were all almost all retired folk who had the time to go over the issue and look at it. I think there's a lot of ways to engage with people beyond that. And that's great that those people are engaged, but I feel like there's a lot more people who...
Yeah, it's not a representational swath of the community.
There are lots of people who've got kids and it's too difficult for them. Some of the things that we have done to open up our processes, our decision-making processes a bit more is, we started last year live streaming our council meetings.
That's really good.
Online. I passed a motion for us to investigate actually porting that stream to Facebook Live as well, so that people can actually comment in real time, so that there can be a discussion there. Now, that discussion is not interactive, right? Those questions won't be put to the councillors at the council meeting. I don't think we're at the level yet that we can really work that out. But the people watching can have a discussion, and I think that's actually kind of important. Even if they're just saying, this guy's an idiot, whatever.
This guy's got great hair.
Yeah. Well, I wish. But so we've done that once. And it was, there were some technical issues why we haven't done that again, but I think we're bringing it back. And so, that I think is another really great way, because to remember that our webcast is on and to go to our website and all that sort of stuff. But if you have just happened to like our page before, it'll say City of Port Phillip is going live in 10 minutes. You can go and have a look. Our viewer numbers massively shot up and people were really engaged. Even my brother, who lives in Austria and has no interest in local government whatsoever, was like, I got a free half hour. I'll have a look, And I think that's important. He was sending me messages telling me that I looked stupid and
as
and
brother
all that
should.
as a good brother does. But this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do to better engage people. But I do have to say it is a passion of mine.
Yes.
Along with all the passions.
Yes. Basically, thanks so much for your time, Tim. I really look forward to speaking to some of your colleagues as well, maybe down the track. Well, sort of as soon as we have something good to cover, we can do a panel show, get you all together.
Sure, yeah.
If there's anything I can do to help down the track with outreach or promotion for anything you're doing, I basically will... Listeners watch this space. I'm sure that me and Tim will be working together more in future because you're willing to embrace new media and stuff like this. Somebody walking into your office with a little recorder and seeing where it goes.
It'd be an absolute pleasure. And I do my little video weekly updates from your local councillor, and I wonder whether maybe I could start having guests on. Maybe it could be a thing. Who knows?
There you go. Yeah. Perfect. Well, I'll link that in the show notes as well, and I'll be a viewer from now on.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I'll just switch that off here.
And we hope you enjoyed that. It sure gave us a lot of ideas, and Mark and myself are excited at the possibility of working with Tim again.
That's right. In fact, Tim has already helped me out with introductions to other councillors on the Port Phillip Council and even given us some contacts up in your neck of the woods, Rich. So that was a very lucky meeting at the park that day on Earth Day.
Yes, certainly was, yeah. And it seemed, Mark, you had a very casual, informal first meeting with Tim. And I was struck when listening to the interview just how relatable he was. As he says, he really needs to hear from his constituents about how much and what type of action they want on climate change.
Yeah, that's right. I think you guys, the listeners, you'll hear from that just how, just because they're in city council, these people aren't scary. They're still quite easy to talk to, quite easy to approach. And it really is only when people like us make our voices heard at all levels of government, but especially at city council, that people like Tim can really start to go to bat for us on the changes we want to see in the climate.
Seemed like that in the interview. You covered just about everything, Mark, except waste. But we've got a big show coming up about that, and I wasn't sure if you'd forgotten.
No, I didn't forget. I did talk to Tim about waste, but it was off mic after the interview.
Okay.
Tim has kindly introduced me to Catherine Copsey. Now, she's another member of the council, another Greens Associated member, and she's kind of the waste guru, is what Tim referred to her as. So I do have an interview scheduled with her for next week. I am able to tell you, though, luckily, happily, that Port Phillip Council, their waste contractor was not offshoring to China. So if you put something in the recycling bin in Port Phillip City Council, that is not going to landfill. They're not doing it Ipswich City Council at this point. What I don't know, and what Tim doesn't know at the moment either, and we'll need to come up with Catherine, is whether or not that recycled material is being stockpiled at the moment. So whether it's just sitting somewhere in a warehouse building up, and what'll happen with their waste contract, or whether they'll have to renegotiate their rates.
And those are the questions that local councils are asking all over Australia, aren't they?
That's right.
All right, that's it until next week, where we'll be running a full interview with Dougal Holmes, and we'll be talking to him about his successful fights against polluting industries in Canberra. Thank you for listening. This has been Climactic, the voice of the people on climate change.
Because Houston, we have a problem.
The Climactic Collective.